Good morning, everyone. It is November 29th, 2018. This one is from Brandon Smith via altmarket.com. Don't get distracted by the Trump-fed soap opera. The crash will continue. Back in 2015, 2016, I talked about how the economy was being propped up by the Federal Reserve, the IMF, and among others. And the reason that was is because they didn't want to crash the economy during Barack Obama's term. I also said that this was the purpose of Donald Trump's election, to serve as a Trojan horse and to allow the economy to be crashed on his watch, to take the blame. And here we are today. It's about to happen. So let's get into it. It's a fairly long article. I'll try to be as quick as I can. The beginning of 2018, Brandon wrote extensively on what was likely to happen under the administration of Jerome Powell, the new Federal Reserve chairman. In his article, New Fed Chairman Will Trigger a Historic Stock Market Crash in 2018, it was published in February. He predicted that the Fed would continue interest rate increases and balance sheet cuts throughout the year, and they would knowingly initiate a crash in equities. And they have, right? They have. To be clear, this was not a very popular sentiment at the time, just as it wasn't popular when he predicted that in 2015 that the Fed would launch interest rate hikes instead of going to negative rates in order to start a catalyst for economic crisis. The problem some people have with this concept is that they just can't fathom the central bank would deliberately crash the system. They desperately cling to the notion that the Fed and other central banks want to keep the machine rolling forward at any cost. This is not true. They do not want to keep it rolling at all costs. They want to crash it. That way they can create or introduce a one-world digital currency. But what comes first, the currency or the giga-death? It's not going to be mega-death. It's going to be giga, as in billions. Which is going to happen first? We'll find out, I guess, the hard way, won't we? The claim is that the banking elites are required to keep the system propped up in a state of reanimation because they are reliant on the system to provide capital and thus influence. The people that assert this argument don't seem to understand how central banks work. As most of you should know by now, central banks are essentially protected counterfeiting schemes using fractional reserve banking at a ratio that is secret. So we don't even get to know what the ratio is in this fractional reserve Ponzi scheme. Central banks create their own capital from thin air, and they can infuse capital into international banks at will when it suits their purpose. There is no profit motive for the banking syndicate. They can print the cash or digitally conjure it anytime they want, and they can use it to purchase tangible assets before their printing diminishes the buying power of the currency, passing price inflation on to regular citizens. It's always the regular citizens that have to pay the ultimate prices. We pay the financial prices. We pay the physical prices, going to war on behalf of these fucking pigs, being gunned down by one of their enforcers. Thus, keeping the system in perpetual positive motion is not necessary in terms of the transfer of wealth from the population to the banking class. In fact, economic crisis events are very useful to the elites because these events allow the banks to buy hard assets like natural resources, businesses, properties, and so on for pennies on the dollar. You might recall that, which Rothschild was it? Anschel? I'm not sure if that was the one, but the Rothschild that was present during the Napoleonic War, where Britain ended up beating Napoleon, had Lord Wellington there watching the whole thing. He got word faster than anybody else, said that Britain lost the war, plunging their assets, and then he turned around and bought all those assets for pennies on the dollar. And the Rothschild family has owned Britain ever since, among other places. For example, this is exactly what they did during the Great Depression when major banks like J.P. Morgan bought out thousands of failed local banks across the U.S. and took control of mortgages and other assets being paid off by a vast portion of the citizens. The bank system never looked the same again, and international banks continued to dominate ever since as localized competition remains elusive. Yep, they ate up all the small mom-pop type banks, and what's left are the favored mega banks. The too big to fail banks, which they should have failed. They should have been allowed to fail, and the bankers who ran those banks should have been publicly hung. This also occurred after the crash of 2008, when companies like Blackstone bought up billions of distressed mortgages far well below previous market value, and they took control of the property market, turning bankruptcies into rentals. According to these people, the 2008 crash was an asset-buying bonanza for banks and corporations bailed out by the Federal Reserve, or bailed out by you. Low interest rates provided endless cheap credit through which companies could buy anything and everything. Of course, they mostly bought their own equities through stock buybacks, artificially inflating the stock market to the point of absurdity. The point is, there is every reason for central banks and their international corporate banking partners in crime to want a controlled demolition of the economic system. And that they always have, going all the way back to Roman times, and always will, control the dominant currency mechanism and the means of wealth distribution. And they always use the fiscal disasters they create to buy up all of the hard assets for nearly nothing. Economic panic is a very useful tool in the hands of the banking establishment for molding social conditions in a way that gives them greater psychological power over the public. In every instance of financial catastrophe, it is the bank or banker cabal that is asked to step in and save the day. In 2008, it was the Federal Reserve that was tapped to act as a hero to the mainstream, and only through the tireless efforts of alternative economists and liberty activists has this fallacy been exposed. In the next crisis, it will be the IMF that is tapped and used as a front organization for the next rescue as market collapse leads into a crisis in confidence in our dollar. And he outlined the plan for this in his article. IMF reveals that cryptocurrency is the New World Order end game. And of course, I talked about that some. The average person is completely unaware of the Hegelian con game being played. And when banking institutions step in as the designated caregivers to the ailing economy, what we sometimes see is a kind of reverse Florence Nightingale effect, in which the patients fall in love with the nurse merely because they have associated the extension of economic function to an extension of their lives, or at least an extension of comfort in their lives. And that's one unfortunate thing about comfort. Once you experience it for so long, you do just about anything to maintain it. And this is part of the problem we have here in the United States. People are, they eat well for the most part, they have endless choices, and they're comfortable. Comfort breeds complacency. Comfort breeds complacency. Even now, mindless optimism and blind faith in the markets continue. And the assumption on the part of the investment world is that the banks will eventually be forced to admit their policy error, and they won't. They'll never admit that they have a policy error on tightening, and that they will revert back to lower rates or even more QE. And that's not going to happen. There's nothing left to give for QE. Nothing. An example of the Fed reverse fantasy or reversal fantasy was the reaction to Jerome Powell's recent speech in light of criticism by the Trump administration. Powell's statement included a throwaway line indicating that the Fed rates was just below the neutral rate, which investors are also trading. Computers immediately interrupted as a dovish pullback from a previous statement in which Powell said they were a long way from the neutral rate. So here's three scenarios that Brandon sees happening here. Scenario 1, the Fed suddenly skips rate hikes in the near term under pressure from markets and the White House. Scenario 2, the Fed fully admits to policy error in light of stock market declines and relaunches QE. Won't happen. Scenario 3, Trump announces successful trade war negotiations primarily with China and ends tariffs measures. This will not happen either. And these are not his scenarios. These are scenarios that he is saying won't happen. Today, Jerome Powell is taking the exact same actions in policy that he originally admitted would cause a crash. Powell is not tightening out of stupidity, nor is he tightening out of a misguided error in policy. Powell is tightening because the banking elites want a crash, period. And as I've said many times, this will be the thing that throws our country into chaos, and many people are going to end up starving. Many people are going to end up dying from waterborne illness because they're too stupid to filter and boil their water. So, anyway, I thought I would share this with you. There's a lot more to it. I guess I can leave a link in the description box below. Or, yeah. And tell me what you think in the comment section. Do you hope this shit happens like I do? Anyway, everyone has a good day. Till next time, kill the state, live free.